Hello and welcome to another episode of Teaching with Inquiry Live. Happy New Year, everybody. And I hope that if today was your first day back in the classroom, that you had a good day and that you had something planned for today, even though if you were like me, you were probably in denial last night at 9:30 thinking, oh, you're right. I do actually have to plan something to do at work this week. I hope you enjoyed your 2 weeks off and at least are feeling refreshed and relaxed and ready to go again and get back into the swing of things. So tonight I wanted to talk about being it's a new year. It's a great time to think about New Year's resolutions because we're in the mood. We're in the mood to try something new. We're ready to change things up at the end of the year and beginning of a new one. So it's a great time to talk about some of the things that you can try in your classroom, that you can use in your classroom. So things you can try, things you can do, and things maybe you should stop doing. So I'm going to go through my list of things that I think you should consider to make as a New Year's resolution, not a personal one, but a career New Year's resolution or a teacher's New Year's resolution. So there's a few things that I want to share with you tonight. But before we do that, I want to introduce myself. If you are new to the Teaching with Inquiry live show, you are in the right place if you are interested in figuring out how to fit all of the things that we as teachers have to do and learning how to fit it all together and making teaching with inquiry and teaching in general in your classroom more fun and engaging for both you and your students. My name is Patty, and I am the teacher blogger behind madlylearning.com, and I am a 4-5 split grade teacher here in Ontario, Canada, and I come live every single week. I've been off for 2 for the holidays, but every single Monday at 9 p.m. I am live here on the Madly Learning Facebook page talking about how to use inquiry-based teaching practices in your classroom. So no surprise there that one of the things that I think should perhaps be on your New Year's resolution as a teacher is to try inquiry. Now, I want to challenge you not just to try inquiry in science and social studies, where many of us are more comfortable at beginning to dip our toe in, but if you are somebody who has already dipped your toe into using inquiry-based learning in your classroom, in science and social studies, my challenge for you in this new year, new resolution is to try inquiry in other places in the curriculum, because inquiry-based teaching strategies are just good teaching. So it doesn't just have to be isolated into science and social studies where we're looking at research projects, but it can also be embedded in math, where you give students a real-world problem that might not have a very simple or straightforward. Let's think about how we can try to integrate inquiry into other types of subjects. So I was talking about math and how you could give your students a real-world project that allows them to use a variety of math strategies in order to solve that problem. Now, because you're giving them the problem, but you're not necessarily giving them the path for the solution, they have to come up with that, and there's a lot of problem solving and trial and error that's going to be in place. That could be one type of activity where you could use inquiry to embed that into math. Now, it doesn't even need to necessarily be that big of a project. You could simply look at how to rearrange the furniture in your classroom and looking at what that might look like, or a desk rearrangement if you've got desks, or table rearrangements. I have those trapezoid tables, and when we're moving into geometry right now, and we're going to look at area and perimeter very soon. And as we do, I'm going to ask my students how they could possibly combine those trapezoids in different ways to seat a number of students differently. So we now have 6 together. How could you give them a problem where they could just get hands-on, solve the problem, experiment, trial and error, plan, fail, try again, and go through that whole inquiry process with your students? And that could be done with math. If you are looking at using inquiry in language, you could simply just be integrating more voice and choice for your students, whether or not you're allowing them the ability to free write and choose what it is that they're writing about each week, or you're giving them choices in the types of questions they're responding to and reading, and you're giving them a variety of things to read. Introducing choice and voice into your literacy program, as well as things like centers and differentiated activities, will use some of those same inquiry-based teaching practices and use them in a different context like inquiry. You can also use inquiry-based learning in art. Think of giving your students an artist or having them explore who a famous artist is behind maybe a piece of artwork that they like. Have them learn more about that artist and then recreate a piece of art in that artist's style and have them share that with other people. If they're using that kind of exploratory learning and then having to share and take action on what they're learning, you're again using inquiry-based teaching practices in your classroom in other contexts beyond perhaps the familiar science and social studies. So that is my first challenge, is to use inquiry everywhere. Another one is to try flexible seating. I mean, you've probably never heard of flexible seating, right? I mean, who hasn't heard of flexible seating? It's everywhere. But I think the key to flexible seating is that a lot of people see the big name gadgets and gizmos that you can buy, that you can use, or you're putting in full couches and it looks like a Pottery Barn classroom. I'm not sure that you need to go right there right away, especially when you're probably self-funding a lot of this yourself. But there's definitely cost-effective ways to do it, especially if you're doing it over time or you're looking for donations. And it's just a matter of taking the time and the space to find the pieces that will work for you in your space and in your classroom for your students. Now, flexible seating is more than just about furniture. For the biggest reason I use it has nothing to do with the types of furniture I have in my classroom or having the newest, greatest things. It's for the flexibility and the ability for my students to move. I have a very high proportion most years of having students that have attention difficulties or need to be moving while they're learning, or they just need alternative learning accommodations so that they can be successful. It's not that they can't do the work, they're just not traditional learning kids most often. So giving them the ability to not sit at a desk or giving them the flexibility and freedom to move around the classroom or change the positions that they happen to be in actually means that I have less classroom management issues in my room, as well as I have those students that are often pointed out because they fidget in a very traditional room are blending into my room because there's a lot more movement and visual movement in my classroom. So those students fit in much better because they have that flexibility to move around. Flexible seating also allows my students to really get in the zone of working. So there's something to be said about a student that is lying down on your carpet with their book in front of you, and it looks like they have tuned the entire world out, and they are so focused on their creative writing task that you're pretty sure you'll have to tap them on the shoulder if the fire alarm goes off because they're so in the zone. There's something about having flexible seating options in your classroom that allow your students to really get in a zone that allows them to be creative and get them to learn with each other and by themselves in a way that I can't really accomplish when they're all jammed in together at their tables. So with a large class, actually using flexible seating makes my room appear as though there's less students in there and that there's more space. Now, granted, there are literally students everywhere, but they can sit in the tiniest nooks and crannies and make themselves into these small spaces, which means you actually have more space in your classroom for students because it doesn't look like they're all jammed together trying to work. And those students that need a private space to work can create their private space to work. And that could simply just be hiding under your desk or sitting in a corner somewhere or just where they position their body on a carpet. You can get yoga mats from the dollar store and cut them up in half, and then 4 yoga mats turns into 8 yoga mats. You can look for those little circle carpet squares, again, at Dollarama. I find myself every once in a while checking out the Facebook marketplace for gently used furniture that's still in decent condition. I, in fact, scored a couch that I had kind of been looking for a while on Facebook marketplace for 20 bucks. It is one of the most favorite pieces in my classroom. Driving by a Value Village, often I'm stopping past those thrift stores to see whether or not their furniture section has things like lamps or different pieces of wooden furniture that I could repaint or repurpose into a piece that students could sit on. So I've reused ottomans that absolutely don't match, but because I'm a little kooky about them matching, I've just used shower curtains and used my rudimentary sewing skills to put a cover over top of them. So that was definitely just things that I've built over time fairly inexpensively to install some of these flexible seating options in my classroom, which my students really enjoy. And it's also a huge motivator for students to stay on task and getting their work done, because it's a huge privilege in my room to be able to use that flexible seating. And when I need to, I've absolutely taken that option away, and they do all jam into the tiny little table spaces that they have, and they very much begin to appreciate the fact that they do have the flexible seating options in our classroom. So that's number 2, flexible seating. Another thing I think I need to encourage you to try is using more digital tech in your classroom. And if you are going to use digital tech in your classroom, then you should probably have a learning management digital piece of software that's going to help you do that. And for that, I highly recommend Google Classroom, because it is a simple and straightforward, intuitive program that integrates with almost everything. There's very few clicks to get started. Students can just pull up the app and they're submitting documents. And for me, the best thing is that it keeps my email inbox out of my students' hands, because they're not email submitting work to me. They're dropping it in the Google Classroom, which is in organized folders within my Drive, and it organizes all of those folders for my students as well. So it's very handy in that if you are going to have digital resources for your students, whether it's reading or research, or you're just giving them materials, the ability to use Google Classroom to disseminate information to your students in a digital format makes it very easy and simple to use. And it definitely doesn't depend on you needing 1-to-1 devices. You could have a 5-to-1 device ratio and still be able to use Google Classroom as a way to manage your students' digital hand-in bin, especially if you have students with personal devices for their CEA devices, which is their special education supplied devices. Even if you're only using Google Classroom for a select few students that you need to be able to give digital resources to and have them hand in digital resources because you can't always print everything that they do, Google Classroom is a great way to manage it. So try using more tech in your classroom. And if you're using tech in your classroom, really investigate how to use Google Classroom to make your life a lot simpler to be able to manage that use in your room. So now I'm going to move on to some of the work-life balance suggestions. In terms of resolutions, we always like to make work-life balance suggestions. Now, some of these work-life balance suggestions, I'm going to use some of the ones that I have done myself and share with you some of the things I've learned and some surprises that I came across along the way. Number 1 is do less planning. So many teachers I keep reading over all of the Facebook groups are absolutely overwhelmed with the planning workload that they are encountering as teachers, especially when they're teachers with, say, young families, or they're new to the profession and they're just trying to wrap their head around all of the planning. So my resolution for you is to try to do less planning. Now, I'm not just going to say that and then leave you hanging there. The quote is, the person that does the most talking is the one doing the most learning. So I'd like to position that as the person doing the most planning is the one doing the most learning. As a teacher, one of the easiest ways to do less planning is to include your students in the decision making of what it is that you're going to do. Because students want to be invested in what they're doing and what they're learning. They don't always want to just be told what it is they're going to be doing next. But their engagement and motivation in the things that you do plan goes up significantly when they have ownership in what they're doing. The best way to give them that ownership is for you to stop planning so much about what they're going to do and actually ask them what they want to do and allow them the ability to do some of the planning themselves. Now, when they do that, they often plan more engaging activities that have less prep work for you to do because they don't think of all of that. They think of what they could possibly get done and what materials they might have in order to accomplish that. And it's generally speaking not stuff that's going to need you to prep a ton at home. So ask them. So the next time you're thinking, well, what are we going to do for a culminating project? Stop. Don't answer that question. Go to your students. Tell them, here are the things that we've learned. We've learned this, 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 and this. Give them the things that you have learned so far in that subject. And then simply ask them, let's design a project that shows me that you know all of these things, that shares all of the things you've learned about those 5 topics that we've already covered. What could we possibly do that would allow you to show me that you know those things? Students will come up with a variety of challenging tasks or maybe less challenging tasks. They'll probably come up with the tasks that they have experience in doing. The very first time they do it, it might just be, oh, we'll make a poster. Oh, we'll make a booklet. The next few times they do it, they'll begin to push themselves more to do more creative things that they wouldn't otherwise do. So really try to push yourself to stop planning so much about what your student's day is going to look like when you're at home or you're doing your personal planning, and really ask your students and do some of the planning with them together so that they can have a lot more ownership over what it is that's happening in their classroom. Now, this leads into the idea of giving up more control. Now, I think most of us can probably admit, if you're like me, which based on some of the conversations I've had with many of you, a lot of you are like me in you're all little mini control freaks, and we like to be in control of a lot of the things that are happening in our classroom. So giving up some of that planning might cause a bit of stress and anxiety because we don't want to give up the control. We want to know what's happening at all times, and we want to be in control. But we're educating students. And students want autonomy. It's the world that they're living in. They're not living in a world where they're used to having adults make all of the decisions for them. Maybe some of them are, but they're used to having information at their fingertips. They're used to the ability of sharing their stories with others and having them order food from anywhere and have all of their questions answered in milliseconds. And it's not simply just that they're spoiled or entitled or impatient. I mean, maybe that's a factor, but it is the reality of the world that they live in. They want to have some autonomy and the ability to make their own decisions. But if they go to school and the only person making the decision is the teacher, then they become passive participants in their own education. And that passive participation in learning is often disengaging because it just means they have to go through the motions. They don't actually have to be actively involved in the learning. So I often find that sometimes the reasoning why we can't let go of some of that control is the reason given that the kids can't handle it. But I'd like to really kind of push the limits there and say, is it the kids that can't handle it? Maybe there are some kids that can't handle that lack of oversight. There's definitely those students that have, but a lot of the students need that autonomy and appreciate it. Now, I'm not saying let go of control of your classroom. That's not at all what I'm saying. I'm saying let go of the control where you're controlling all of the learning. not the management of the behavior. That's a completely separate thing. But you've got to let go of some of the control over the learning and what learning looks like in your classroom, and that it's got to be more responsive to the students that are in front of you. So give it up for your resolution. Let go a little bit more control. Put yourself in that uncomfortable position. It's that growth mindset that we can feel uncomfortable as we're learning something new and pushing ourselves, but coming through to the other side where you can see that your students are engaged. You have less behavior problems in your classroom because students are engaged in what they're doing. They're motivated to continue doing what they're doing, going through that motion. And it's tough the first couple of months, but then you get to a point where that routine is established and students really get a good understanding of what it is that you're expecting. Now, the final thing that I want to say, now this is the resolution that I think you should all promise to stop doing. And that resolution is to stop comparing yourself to someone else's highlight reel. I think what makes us feel often bad about how we're doing in our own classroom, or we feel what we think we should be doing or what it should look like in our classroom, is often we have this measuring stick and we're measuring ourselves against somebody else's highlight reel, say on Instagram or even here on Facebook. You have to remember that anybody as a teacher who is sharing their stuff and sharing what they're doing in their classroom, they're only ever sharing their highlight reel. Teachers aren't like mummy bloggers. We can't share our blooper reel because our blooper reel is of a child who belongs to somebody else. That's somebody else's child that might be on that blooper reel. So we have to be very conscious of sharing those bad days. Yet I know for myself, when I put myself out there every week talking to other teachers, I share on Instagram and Facebook the things that are happening in my classroom. I'm only sharing the highlight reel. I've made a conscious effort not to share that blooper reel, to respect the confidentiality of what's happening in my classroom, or maybe the privacy of my students as well as my own family. So you've got to remember that when you're looking at what you think your expectations are of yourself, are they realistic expectations, or are you measuring yourself up against a Pinterest-worthy picture that you see on Pinterest? Because Pinterest-worthy classrooms are often there and then they're gone. I know sometimes when I do my classroom in September, I will take pictures and I will often use those pictures and post them as part of Pinterest. Yet that is not what my classroom day to day looks like. That's what my classroom looks like before students have ever touched anything in my room, because the minute the students are in there, it's a bit of a chaotic mess. And my desk this morning when I walked in was still a disaster from the Friday when I just had to run out at the end of the day. So I think it's important, we're making a New Year's resolution to stop being so hard on ourselves as teachers, and remember that we are going to show up and we are going to do the best that we can do. And that is fine with us, and we have to look at what it is that we want to be able to accomplish and measuring ourselves to our own successes. So I did this last year. What am I going to try new again this year? Where am I going to push myself to do something different? And then celebrating your successes when you have tried something new and pushed boundaries with your students, and you've seen the gains and the successes that they have as a result of the things that you have facilitated in your classroom. I think that's what we need to celebrate, as opposed to comparing ourselves to often a highlight reel. So those are my suggested thoughts on the New Year's resolutions, or maybe they're just really some of my own. That could be it too. Those are definitely things that I consider going forward as my own New Year's resolutions. So thank you very much for joining me. I really do hope that you push yourself to try something new, even if it's a baby step forward, and always push your practice so that you can do better for yourself, whether you are trying to push yourself to do something new that you haven't tried before, or you are taking a step back and setting boundaries for yourself so that you can keep care of your own mental health and your own well-being and take care of your family as well. So sometimes a New Year's resolution could be to take that step forward or to take that step back, depending on what you need. But I hope that you can set those goals and are successful at achieving them. Thank you very much for tuning in today. Next week, we are going to be very topical and talking about assessment because dun, 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 everyone knows report cards are coming. So that is what we're going to be sharing and talking about. So stay tuned because next week I'm going to have some tips on how to get those report cards done without sacrificing all of your own time. So thank you very much for joining me, and I will see you next week. Bye for now.